Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, December the 26th, 2024. Well, happy Christmas again. I suppose I can say happy Christmas again because, well, I'm recording on the morning of December the 25th. So for me, right now, it is Christmas Day. So I wish you happy Christmas or happy Boxing Day if you're not watching this until December the 26th. And of course, I'm going to be looking at the astrology for December the 26th. And today, December the 26th, there is an opposition between Mercury and Jupiter. Now, we have had this quite recently, and the reason we're getting this Mercury-Jupiter opposition back and forth is because of Mercury going retrograde. So Mercury going forward made the opposition to Jupiter. Now then it went retrograde, made the opposition to Jupiter. It turned direct. Now it's making another opposition to Jupiter. So we've had quite a lot of Mercury-Jupiter oppositions recently. And I do want to focus on this aspect and what it might mean. I also want to have a quick look at Emmanuel Macron's chart because it was his birthday quite recently. His birthday was on December the 21st, so I kind of missed his birthday. And Emmanuel Macron has an opposition between Mercury and Jupiter in his chart, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to look at what's going on in Emmanuel Macron's chart, because his Mercury-Jupiter opposition is about to be triggered by Saturn and Neptune, so we might want to consider what that might mean. Anyway, before I look at Mercury opposition Jupiter in detail, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Thursday, December the 26th, 2024. So here is the chart for today, set for noon. And the moon, you can see, is still in Scorpio, 1623 Scorpio, New York time. So at least set for noon. So that means that the moon is moving out of the Via Combusta in the Americas. Via Combusta is between 15 Libra, 15 Scorpio. So with the moon moving out of the Via Combusta, moving into late Scorpio, that might mean that things are starting to stabilize to a certain extent. I think moon in early Scorpio can be a bit of a problem. It can be a time when things happen which we weren't necessarily expecting, and so there might be a sense that things are starting to calm down. And that moon in Scorpio, you will notice, is trine Saturn. So moon trine Saturn can be about stability, emotional stability. If perhaps we're not going to overreact when the moon is trine Saturn. Okay, the moon is also going to be making a quincunx to Jupiter, perhaps. So there's moon in Scorpio, quincunx Jupiter and Gemini, but I don't think that aspect is particularly major. And I think the moon trine Saturn, is the thing to watch out for, certainly in terms of the way we express our emotions and there being a certain amount of restraint. Yet we don't want to go too far on that idea of restraint because Mercury is opposition Jupiter. There you see Mercury is at 1331 Sagittarius, Jupiter's at 1349 Gemini. And this is an aspect I'll be talking about in detail later in this video with a few examples, and I also want to relate it to Emmanuel Macron. But that Mercury opposition Jupiter could quite literally be about talking too much. I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, Mercury is a planet of communication. You make it opposition Jupiter, so you've got lots to say, haven't you? It could be about thinking too much, and it may be about overreacting. Now, I've just said that moon is trine Saturn, so I thought that might create some stability, and I think the moon trine Saturn may be working at an emotional level, but I don't think there's anything particularly emotional about Mercury opposition Jupiter. In fact, there can be a certain amount of excitement with Mercury opposition Jupiter, having ideas, inspirations, and we might be wondering, what can we do? How can we get these inspirations out into the open? But it is an opposition. Oppositions can be difficult, and there can be resistance, and there is a danger that we just take things too far. So that's really the main picture astrologically. We do have a decile between Venus and Neptune. There is Venus and 21, 22 Aquarius, making the decile to Neptune 30. So there's approximately 36 degrees between between Venus and Neptune. So 36 degrees is obviously 1/10 of the circle. So that's a decile. Deciles are about the struggle to create something, the struggle to put a vision into practice, into action. What kind of vision are we talking about? Venus-Neptune. Venus-Neptune can be about the idea, about the way people relate. That could be how Venus-Neptune works. We might have perhaps a fantasy how we can relate to other people. It might be a fantasy, but we'd somehow want to turn it into reality, and because it's a decile, and deciles are about, but decile is in the jargon, that's an opposition on the fifth harmonic. It's like a quintile, but there's more struggle to it. So a quintile is about what we are trying to project. We have a fantasy, we're trying to turn it into reality. With a quintile, it's fairly straightforward. With a decile, there's struggle. It's 10, 5 times 2. 2 is the number of struggle. 5 is about trying to create something. So 5, that's 5 times 2, struggle to create, Venus-Neptune. So we have fantasies, perhaps about people, perhaps not just about people. Venus is a planet which can be about art and aesthetics. So there might be a struggle to create a particular image, and that may, for example, be about the way we dress or the way we talk, the whole way in which we present ourselves. And so that can be how the decile is working. So it is a bit of a struggle there, and so I don't know if it's possible, but I suppose if you're considering how you're presenting yourself, I think putting a bit of effort into creating the look that you are dreaming about, you may be able to create something there. So that's the picture in New York, noon New York, with the moon at 1623 Scorpio at noon. Turning to the picture in Sydney, Australia, as a representative of Australia and New Zealand, you can see that at noon the moon is at 8 degrees Scorpio. So it is a bit earlier. So if you're in Australia and New Zealand, the moon is going to be in the Via Combusta pretty much all day. So and that moon trine Saturn may not really make itself felt fully until this evening. So if you are in Australia or New Zealand, you might find that things might happen that you weren't necessarily expecting, and you shouldn't perhaps create fixed plans, or plans which are really fixed, which have got you have created no possibility for a change of plan. Well, things can happen, and I think perhaps that's something you need to look out for and be ready to change those plans. It's not that plans are going to be destroyed, it's just that plans might have to be adjusted, and you can't necessarily predict other people's emotional reactions, not necessarily. But on the plus side, the moon is sextile with Sun. So we had the moon sextile with Sun sort of more yesterday from a perspective of, say, the Americas and Europe, and you were perhaps missing out on a moon sextile sun. Well, you get it today, especially this morning. So moon sextile sun creates harmony, I would have said, maybe even creates stability. So maybe you miss out on the stability of moon trine Saturn, but you get the harmony of moon sextile sun. So that's not too bad. But if you are in Australia and New Zealand and East Asia, try not to be absolutely committed to a set of plans which just cannot be changed. You need to have some flexibility in the system. And then there is the heliocentric picture for today, putting the sun at the center of the solar system, because astrologers generally use a geocentric system. They look at everything from a perspective of the Earth. That's why planets go retrograde. In the heliocentric system, planets do not go retrograde. So heliocentrically, there's not a massive amount going on. Heliocentrically, we have the beginnings of a heliocentric Jupiter square Saturn. We've just had a Jupiter square Saturn geocentrically, but you get several geocentric squares between Jupiter and Saturn. I think we had one in August. We just had one on Christmas Eve, and we're going to get another geocentric Jupiter-Saturn square, I think, over the summer. I think next June, I think. Is that right? Or is it July? I should know. Okay, let me just tell you, remind myself. I was just talking about it. I think it's, it is. Yeah, it's in June. It's the last geocentric square between Jupiter and Saturn. But heliocentrically, because the planets don't go retrograde, you just get it once, and so you can see the beginnings of the Jupiter-Saturn square. There's Jupiter 1754 Gemini square, Saturn 1937 Pisces. So they are moving towards each other, and as you know, my view is that this Jupiter-Saturn square has something to do with the business cycle, and it's kind of still unfolding. Perhaps that crisis is still developing, but as I was mentioning on Christmas Eve, I do think in many respects this Jupiter-Saturn square is going to be fortunate, particularly for the American economy in the end. The other thing going on heliocentrically is completely obscure, relatively obscure, and that is the fact that we have a Mars 24th harmonic conjunction. So if you look at Mars with Pluto, so you look at Mars 1645 Cancer. So if you subtract 15, it's always a good way to spot aspects, particularly some of those obscure 24th harmonic aspects. So the 24th harmonic aspect represents the 15 series. So when two planets are 15 degrees apart, they form an aspect, a very minor aspect, but an aspect nonetheless. It's likewise when planets are, say, 75 degrees apart. There is a 24th harmonic conjunction. Why 24? Because 24 times 15 is 360. So in terms of this series, you can see that Mars and Pluto are one. That means because when you take away the 15, you get to 180 minus 15, so they're 165 degrees apart. So there is a heliocentric 24th harmonic conjunction between Mars and Pluto. And that is about the struggle for control. This is heliocentric, and so I think that when you've got the heliocentric chart, I think you're more talking about global trends rather than anything personal. But it just reminds us that the powers that be are always trying to control us, so they're trying to put forward a particular narrative, and the powers that be don't like being on the losing side, and they want to have the last word, and that might be how the Mars-Pluto 24th harmonic conjunction is working. Anyway, let me now look at the 12 signs. So when I did the 12 signs for yesterday, Christmas Day, I was brief. I do want to try to be brief again today. So yesterday, I think, a lot of my readings for the 12 signs were not much longer than 3 minutes. And again, I want to have fairly brief readings for the 12 signs. It's not just because there isn't actually much going on astrologically. It's also, I suppose it's Christmas Day. I'm supposed to, I don't know, I'm supposed to do stuff, am I? I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, so I might be briefer than usual. I mean, it's not Christmas Day. I'm doing this reading on Christmas Day, but of course I'm doing this is for December the 26th. Anyway, so these are my forecasts for 12 signs for today, Boxing Day, Thursday, December the 26th, 2024. Aries. Aries, the moon is still in Scorpio. And with the moon in Scorpio, I think that you feel that you're not entirely able to relate in a sort of free-flowing way to whatever's going on around you. I think that perhaps, Aries, you are a little more introspective than usual. And there are things you just want to think about in your own way, and frankly, you may just want to put up the do not disturb notice. That's not, of course, typical Aries, but every now and then you need to contemplate, you need to think, you need to kind of also look at things. Some things are more complicated than they seem on the surface. And so if you give yourself a chance to really try to understand what's going on, I think that would be a good thing. And also we've got the moon in Scorpio is trine Saturn in Pisces. Now that moon Saturn trine, I think, is going to be helpful in terms of you making sense of some of your private feelings. Now, there's nothing wrong with private feelings. I suppose when you talk about private feelings, you might think that something somewhat sort of negative is going on, but no, you've got your feelings and you want to kind of work them through, and you want to make sense of them. Though moon in Scorpio for Aries, it can be quite passionate. I mean, I think there are things you are really passionate about today, things you feel very strongly about, and maybe that's a good reason not to be highly sociable today, because if you were to be highly sociable and you started to talk about things you felt strongly about, then you might show some of your feelings, perhaps even some of your anger. But I don't want to give the impression that today is just difficult and you're just looking forward to the moon to move into Sagittarius. Tomorrow the moon will move into Sagittarius, but you need to just or certainly the day after. But there are other things going on. If you are passionate about something, then you could say that passion is the root of creativity. I mean, real creativity does need passion. I mean, if you're not passionate about something, well, you're non-committal. And if you're non-committal, what can you achieve? So it is actually a day when you can be very committal in your private world, perhaps, but you can be committal about the things that are important to you. And just consider what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and just give it everything. And, this might be some interest you have. Perhaps in the past you've took the view, well, you're interested in something, well, so what? Interests come and go. But there might be some interest you have or some ability you have that you really become passionate about and that you really want to turn it into something. And today might be the day to do it. especially if you can create a little bit of distance between yourself and other people. Though I suppose it is possible. Moon in Scorpio is passionate, so I suppose that passion could relate to people who you really care about, who share your interests as well. That would be great. So there is the possibility of something quite special happening, but I think by and large it all has to happen on your terms. Taurus, the moon continues to move through Scorpio. Of course, Scorpio is your opposite sign, so with the moon moving through Scorpio, I think that you understand the importance of other people and the fact that other people have an influence over you. It's an influence that you perhaps would prefer wasn't there, but it is a reality. And with the moon making a trine to Saturn, I think in a way you can benefit from other people. Other people can be a plus, and it may be that you can use other people as some kind of a stabilizing influence. And so it's being the day after Christmas, it might be a time when you might want to socialize, not in a dramatic way, but if you can interact with friends, people who you respect, people who respect you, I think that could be a nice way to expend your energies. And in general, Taurus, I don't think you really need to initiate things. I mean, you might like to initiate things, but if you try to do everything yourself, I don't think it's going to be satisfactory. And maybe other people will have their ideas, and it's really a day when you should be listening and not trying too hard to be the main actor. Now, there is a minor aspect today, Venus decile Neptune. And so with Venus decile Neptune, part of you is looking for something else. You're looking to go beyond. And you perhaps look at your mundane reality. I mean, we all have. I'm not saying that you have a particularly mundane reality. We all have a mundane reality, and you look at your mundane reality, and you, the sort of material nature of the world in which you're existing. You look at that reality, and you're thinking, well, maybe it would be a good idea to somehow go beyond it. Can you go beyond it? It's not easy because it's a decile. Decile can be about a struggle to realize an inner vision, an inner fantasy. But maybe you can go some way towards achieving it. And it may also have something to do with the way you appear, the way you come across. And in the introduction, I mentioned that Venus decile Neptune can be about appearances and what you wear, what you look like. And I think it's particularly the case for you, Taurus. So perhaps you need to consider the clothes you're wearing, the look you're trying to present, and a bit of effort might be something, certainly an effort you might think is important, but you can perhaps, with some effort, create the right style for yourself, a style which is perhaps in keeping with your aspirations. Gemini, the main aspect today is an opposition between Mercury and Jupiter. And I think this Mercury-Jupiter opposition is quite important, and though it's not an unfamiliar energy, because Mercury has been making this opposition to Jupiter back and forth, I don't know, for the last few weeks, because Mercury made the opposition, then it went retrograde, made another opposition, then it went direct, and it's making the opposition again. And so this opposition Jupiter is, it's also across the main axis of your solar chart. So we've got Mercury in Sagittarius, opposition Jupiter in Gemini. So in a general sense, Mercury opposition Jupiter might encourage you to say things. You actually got a lot to say for yourself, I think. And once you start talking, it may actually be difficult to stop. And you perhaps need to consider the content of what you are saying. I mean, it's possible that you're exaggerating. You might even be talking nonsense. So bear in mind, I'm a Gemini. So perhaps when you're listening to me, you should... When I'm telling you, Gemini, that you're talking nonsense, I may be talking nonsense, so don't necessarily believe me. Anyway, Mercury is... Mercury could exaggerate. It might just say things which are extreme. Gemini might want to try too hard to get noticed. So that is certainly possible. And I think that you do have to make an effort to take into account other people's sensibilities, remembering that Jupiter is ruler of Sagittarius, your opposite sign. So you could say that Mercury opposition Jupiter may indicate relationship issues. You and another person having a disagreement. Remember, this is an opposition. William Lilly said, a square is perfect enmity, an opposition is perfect hatred. And I'm not really talking about hatred, not least because Mercury and Jupiter are in mutual reception. So that is a mitigating factor. Mercury is in Sagittarius, which is Jupiter's sign. Jupiter is in Gemini, which is Mercury's sign. So there is a sympathy between two people who might have very opposing views. So if you do have a disagreement with someone, or you have different views on a political matter, that might be something that you need to bear in mind. Now, this Mercury opposition Jupiter is not actually taking place in isolation. It's actually has an involvement with Saturn, and I'll be talking about this configuration in more detail in my reading for tomorrow. But if you look at it, Mercury is actually making a square to Saturn, and it's making an opposition to Jupiter. So there is a sort of a tension here. Mercury opposition Jupiter, which can be about excessiveness, but then Mercury squares Saturn, which is about restriction. And so perhaps if you do find yourself talking too much, ask yourself why. And the reason you might be talking to yourself, talking a lot, the reason your mind might be active is because you're aware of a growing sense of restriction, and you're trying to defy it by releasing the bonds, doing whatever you can, perhaps losing your sense of mental discipline. That is certainly possible, because in the end, well, not in the end, I think tomorrow Mercury makes a square to Saturn. In fact, today Mercury is already square Saturn. And so with Mercury opposition Jupiter and square Saturn, I think, Gemini, you actually have to be very careful what you say, because Mercury square Saturn can actually be quite nasty. It can use words in a way that can be very destructive. So, Gemini, do be careful what you say with Mercury aspecting the Jupiter-Saturn square. And in general, today, if you want to consider, how you should be going about things, don't get too caught up on that Mercury opposition Jupiter. Perhaps you should focus on the fact that the moon is in Scorpio trine Saturn in Pisces. So moon in Scorpio trine Saturn in Pisces is a very different aspect. It's more of a stabilizing influence, and it's more serious, it's more responsible. And Gemini, perhaps you can make a special effort to be responsible. Might not be what you want to do, but with that moon trine Saturn, actually, you can do useful stuff today. you might not want to, you might not be in the mood to do it, but you can. And I think you can even be recognized for doing it, particularly if you're in a situation where whatever work you're doing is seen by other people. People will recognize the value of what you're doing. And I think that if you're honest with yourself, Gemini, you will know what is important. And if you focus on what is important and leave the trivialities for later, I think that you'll be just fine. Cancer. Cancer, it's a day when I think that you can be yourself in a sort of a quiet, fairly low-profile way. I think that you know what you want, you know what you want to do, and I think that you can just get on and do it. And I think that your overall approach is going to be fairly disciplined. After all, the moon is trine Saturn, but disciplined without being narrow-minded. I think it's a day when you have a certain amount of curiosity. You understand that you don't have all the answers, and I don't think that you're totally hung up on your own opinions. So if you're given a different view of the world, then I think you'll at least give it a chance, and you'll be prepared to sort of listen to what other people have to say, provided you respect them. I mean, I think that's perhaps the key point in terms of who you're mixing with today. Respect really matters. If you don't respect someone, well, obviously they're going to have no impact on you, and worse, I think you might just get, well, you might, the only impact it would have on you is to actually just annoy you. So be I suppose, sparing in your social contacts, but the emphasis should very much be on quality rather than quantity. And you could say that the main aspect today is a trine between the moon and Saturn, and this trine between moon and Saturn may indicate that the key relationships in your life can work well, and that there is a sympathy, there is an understanding, and there is certainly a line of communication. And if there's anyone that you're trying to get in touch with, again, someone you respect, someone who you feel you want to get closer to, now with the moon trine Saturn, it's a great time for reaching out, because I think there's a good chance that you're going to get a sympathetic reception. And I would say, Cancer, that today you should try to keep it simple. Focus on what's important to you, and don't try to do too much. Decide what is the one thing that really matters to you. Not matters to other people, but matters to you. Something that you want to do. And if other people want to join in, that's fine, but if that's not obligatory. If it's something you want to do, just make sure you do get a chance to do it. Maybe now might be the right time to do it. I suppose it's the Christmas, and perhaps there's less interference, and so if it's a nice quiet Boxing Day, then now might be a great time to just do something you've been meaning to do, perhaps something you've been meaning to enjoy. So now might be your chance. And don't try too hard to make everything perfect. That's not a road you want to go down. I mean, I know that the day after Christmas, a lot of people feel that they've got to sort out the mess, even if they're not messy people themselves. And but if you were to do that, there's some danger that you take things too far. So if you're doing something that you feel you have to do, you don't really want to do it, but perhaps you're clearing something up or whatever. There's just a danger you take things too far, and that actually could spoil your day. So what you don't want to do is spend all day clearing up after Christmas after Christmas Day, or doing anything like that. It may have nothing to do with Christmas. You just don't want to you don't want to spend all day clearing things up, and that would be, I think, somewhat annoying and aggravating, and you might feel that you've just wasted your day. So overall, Cancer, focus on yourself and focus on the important people in your life. But when you focus on the important people in your life, remember it fundamentally is about you and your interests. Leo, I don't think there is a great deal you want to do today, which is kind of logical, isn't it? I mean, it's just a day after Christmas, and I think that you just want to be in your world and be happy in your world, and I think that can certainly be the case. And I think that structure is going to matter. Not necessarily physical structure, but emotional structure. Just making sure that you're well protected, that nothing bad is going to happen, that your peace of mind is not going to be disturbed or distracted. And if you can create that kind of environment, that would be fine. Now, there's certainly a temptation. I mean, no, it's not a temptation. It's more of a tendency to restrict yourself, restrict your activities. And, I've already indicated that it is a day that you don't really want to be around too many other people. But that doesn't mean that you don't have good social skills. You actually do have good social skills today if you have a chance to put them into action. So if you do happen to meet people, mix with people, however you do it, whether it's face-to-face or virtually, you might not be in a situation where you want to be there. You'd prefer to be somewhere else, but still you can actually create a good impression, and there's something about you that people like. And if you want to create new connections today, I think that is something that you very much can do. So I think that is perhaps something that you should be focusing on. Now, today there is an opposition aspect between Mercury and Jupiter, and of course tomorrow becomes Mercury squares Saturn. But if we just focus on that Mercury opposition Jupiter, it may be about a balance between what's important to you and what's important to other people. Now, maybe you don't want to have to deal with that balance, and that might be why it might be best that you just do your own thing, and you just try your hardest to ignore most other people. But for many Leos, that Mercury-Jupiter opposition might have an impact. Your mind is trying to focus on your interests, what's important to you, but there's something else challenging you, represented by that Jupiter and Gemini. Jupiter and Gemini may be people trying to get in touch, trying to distract you, maybe. I mean, and it's not that they're deliberately trying to distract you, they want your attention. And so, Leo, you don't want to overreact. And if you're doing something you want to do and other people are pressurizing you, maybe it's your family, other friends or whatever, are pressurizing you to do something else, then there could be a bit of tension, and someone may behave in an exaggerated way. Maybe you, it may be the other person. And fundamentally, the reason why people are behaving in an exaggerated way is because they want to be heard. And so perhaps you want to avoid this Mercury opposition Jupiter by not getting yourself into a situation where you're going one way and other people are going another way, and you're very aware of this tension. So maybe it's like I was saying right at the beginning, perhaps other people should be avoided just for today. Virgo. Virgo, the main aspect today is an opposition between Mercury and Jupiter. Mercury is your ruler. Mercury is in Sagittarius, and with Mercury in Sagittarius, still in Sagittarius, Mercury is not going to move into Capricorn until next year. So with Mercury in Sagittarius, you do value your own space. I mean, as far as when Mercury moves into Capricorn, Mercury will move into Capricorn. Mercury will move into Capricorn on January the 8th. So you got a fortnight left of Mercury in Sagittarius. But while Mercury is in Sagittarius, I think, Virgo, that to an extent, you're at a time when you do appreciate your own company, where you feel that it's important to look after yourself and make sure, home and family, everything's fine. But with that Mercury opposition Jupiter, there's pressure from outside. In fact, Mercury, it's not just Jupiter opposition Mercury, Mercury's actually making a square to Saturn as well. So you feel that pressure first from Jupiter, then from Saturn. It's like the world is saying, well, it's all very well what you're doing, but you need to be doing more. You need to be doing something else. Where are you? And maybe that is the question. Where are you? And how do you respond to that question? I suppose you have to acknowledge to everyone that you exist, but it goes further than that. You may be being challenged to do things that at some level you don't really want to do. But with Mercury opposition Jupiter, I think that you kind of know you have to do it. And so it may be a day when you find yourself doing things that you don't really want to do. You may even find yourself having to go places you don't want to go to, or get involved in responsibilities that you're not in the mood for. And that would be particularly the case if you're working today. I mean, I know that in the UK, December the 26th, everything is just as dead as December the 25th, pretty much. But I know in other parts of the world, December the 26th is pretty much a normal day, normal working day. And so if you're not in the UK, that may be how it feels. And there are things you're supposed to be doing and you don't want to do them, but you have to do them anyway. So that's something I think that you need to consider. But rather than get annoyed about it, maybe you just need to talk about it, because the moon is in Scorpio. The moon is making a trine to Saturn, and that moon trine Saturn for you, I think, is quite useful. It allows you to explain to people what's important to you, and you can be actually very genuine in the way you communicate. It's not about saying a lot. Now, Mercury is, it's true, making an opposition to Jupiter. Now, there is a possibility with Mercury opposition Jupiter that you do say a great deal. But I'm not convinced that the words are going to come out right. I think that the more you talk, the less impact you're having. So we've got Mercury opposition Jupiter, which is talking about one type of communication. It's a type of communication which comes from your brain. It's very cerebral behavior. Cerebral communication. It's about your ideas and your brain clicking away and coming up with things to say. The moon trine Saturn is also about communication, but a different kind of communication. It's about an emotional communication. And I think today you should try to be focusing on that emotional communication. I mean, how do you communicate emotionally? Well, don't ask me, I'm a Gemini, but maybe you know what I mean. By that I mean I'm saying the words communicating emotionally, even though I'm not entirely sure how you communicate emotionally. But I suppose communicating emotionally, I suppose it's all about silences, isn't it? It can be a bit about the body language, the kind of impression you're giving. So you can communicate emotionally even on the phone when people can't see you, because it is about the silences. It's about the way the few words you use string together. And so it's not about the quantity of words, it's about using keywords and the silences in between. And the way you do that, it can be very effective. And so perhaps in terms of communication, if there's something important you want to say, it really should be happening at an emotional level rather than a mental level. And I think if you go about it in the right way and you have the patience to communicate an emotional message, then I think other people can really understand you. And once they understand you, they're really going to start respecting you. Libra, moon continues to be in Scorpio, and with the moon in Scorpio, it's possible that some Librans might be thinking a little bit about money. I suppose Christmas is a time where people can be thinking about money. I mean, it's a time where people can be spending a lot of money. That's possible. And also being aware of financial restrictions and where the limits are. And the moon in Scorpio is making a trine to Saturn. And if you actually think about money today, and I know it's Christmas, Boxing Day, you don't want to be obsessed about money, but if you are thinking about money with moon trine Saturn, it just might occur to you that maybe things could be done better, and that with a disciplined approach, you can make yourself more comfortable. Moon trine Saturn is about discipline. And with the moon in Scorpio, it may be about financial discipline. And, Librans can be a bit free with their money because, Libra is a social sign and Librans want to make everyone happy. I mean, maybe that's a generalization, even a stereotype. But, a good way of making people happy is to throw money at the situation. But with moon trine Saturn, you're looking at things in a different way. And you're having a deeper understanding, perhaps, of what money means and what money symbolizes. Because, in a way, money is a symbol. Particularly at Christmas, a gift has a price. I mean, I know we shouldn't be thinking about the price, but one can. A gift has a price, and that price can be representative and symbolic of the value that one places on another person. Now, you should say, well, it's the thought that counts, not the price that counts. But very often it is the price that counts. And it shouldn't be, but that can be the way it is. And anyway, with the moon trine Saturn, you do have a deeper understanding of money, which may go beyond your particular financial situation. It is about seeing money as a symbol, and perhaps that's something that you can really think about today. You might get some insights about it. And as far as people are concerned, well, you're actually quite persuasive at the moment. I think if you want to be persuasive, if you want to get people to believe you or to listen to you or to accept your viewpoint, I do think that you're going to know how to do it. I think, and it's perhaps because you're prepared to make the effort to create the right situation. I mean, I suppose you can do that mentally, you can do it emotionally, but you can just create a situation in which you can be persuasive, and you'll get your arguments in the right place, and you'll get the details in the right place. And I think, if you're patient, you can slowly but surely make an impression and people are going to start to listen to you. But there's no need to talk too much. I mean, that's a problem I think that everyone has, or most people are going to have, or I don't know, maybe even that's a generalization. It's possible we talk too much. And that is because Mercury is opposition Jupiter. And yeah, you could talk too much. And it's a day when, although there is that temptation to talk too much, I actually think it's unnecessary. You can get your way using very few words. Scorpio. Scorpio, Moon is making a trine to Saturn, and I think that trine between the Moon and Saturn is pretty useful. It allows you to make your position clear. And, once you make your position clear, I don't think that anyone is going to contradict you. And you don't have to say too much. And I say too much. In fact, it is a theme for today because Mercury is making an opposition to Jupiter. Mercury opposition Jupiter affects all of us. And in your case, yeah, there might be a temptation to say a lot, but you don't have to. You can just stick to what's important. And that Moon trine Saturn is going to allow you to create a certain sense of stability around you. And I think, Scorpio, also, you're going to be able to do what you want. I'm sure, Scorpio, there are things you want to do today, and things that they're about you. They're not necessarily about other people. They're about making the most of what you have, and that's something that you can definitely do. And at the same time, you can be somewhat transformative about it. So maybe in the past, Scorpio, you have underestimated yourself. You've taken the view maybe you weren't good enough, that maybe were other people who are better than you. But no, I think if you're honest with yourself, you are the best perhaps in a particular field. And today you actually have a chance to really tune into this and take something that seems ordinary, that maybe you've taken for granted, maybe even other people have taken for granted, and you can transform it into something really very, very special and very unique to you. And so, Scorpio, if you haven't been feeling particularly special recently, and if you've perhaps had some passing negativity, today's a day to take control of things again and actually to understand how good you are at certain things. And even if you're not getting much appreciation from other people, I think you can get appreciation from yourself. I think you deserve appreciation, and I think you can. It doesn't matter if no one recognizes you. You recognize yourself, and once you recognize yourself, then I think some kind of transformative process can start to develop. Now, Mercury opposition Jupiter is the main aspect today for everyone, and I suppose Mercury opposition Jupiter could impact us all. And I suppose I have to ask, how would this Mercury-Jupiter opposition affect you? Mercury opposition Jupiter, this, in your case, the Mercury-Jupiter opposition does fall across the finance axis of your chart. So it might have a financial element. It could be that you are thinking about money more than usual, or perhaps other people are talking about money more than usual. And perhaps you become aware that once you start thinking about money, once you start engaging with money, it's kind of difficult to stop. It just continues. And so it may be the case, Scorpio, that money should be something to be avoided today, all aspects of money, finance, whatever, simply because once you start, it may be difficult to know when to stop. It's like one concern about money leads to another concern, and then it could actually become quite obsessive. It's not really that there's any big financial issue that I don't think you have to worry about right now. It's just with Mercury opposition Jupiter. And don't forget, Mercury is making a square to Saturn as well. It does say something about your thought processes and where your thought processes could go. And so if you find yourself thinking about money and even worrying about money, don't get too obsessed about it, and just take the view that you're just responding to the fact that Mercury is opposition Jupiter. Sagittarius. Mercury continues to move through your sign, and Mercury actually continues moving through your sign until January the 8th. So you've got another, couple of weeks of Mercury in Sagittarius. I mean, the reason it's taking so long in Sagittarius is because Mercury went retrograde in Sagittarius, so that really slowed things down. And now with Mercury in Sagittarius, I think you feel that you do have a lot to say, especially as Mercury is opposition Jupiter. And Mercury in Sagittarius, your sign, Jupiter in Gemini, your opposite sign. So yeah, there is a sense that there is a lot to say. But the question is now the right time to say it? Because, the moon is in Scorpio, and the moon is making a trine to Saturn. So moon and Scorpio making a trine to Saturn in Pisces. And I think, in a way, if you were to say too much or get totally focused on your mind and overthinking things, it could spoil your day. Perhaps moon in Scorpio, Sagittarius, is just inviting you to just relax, just to be calm, not to overthink anything, and not to feel any great sense of obligation. You do what feels right, and you do that, and it should be a relatively easy day. And perhaps the less you think, the less you say, the better for yourself and the better for everyone. But we can't avoid the fact that Mercury is making this exact opposition to Jupiter. And this exact opposition to Jupiter is across an important axis of your chart. And Mercury opposition Jupiter is potentially about disagreement. Can happen. Someone you disagree with. And the more you say, the more you think, the greater the possibility of some kind of disagreement. So, look at all the people you have to deal with today, and just consider the possibility that you have different priorities, you have different ideas, you have different views. And the question then is, what do you do about it? It might be best, Sagittarius, if you steer clear of controversy. And you don't say anything controversial. You don't raise difficult subjects, because once you start, it may be difficult to stop. On the other hand, it may be that you feel you want to have a good argument. You feel that now is the time. It's just you've had enough, and now's the time. In which case, I suppose that might be the right thing to do. Just know what you're letting yourself in for. And if you do have an argument with someone, you do have a disagreement, it doesn't need to be the end of the world, because Mercury and Jupiter are in mutual reception with each other. Mercury and Jupiter are in each other's signs. So even if you're having a heated argument with someone, I think in many cases you and the other person have a fundamental sympathy with each other. And so ideally you would have disagreements and they wouldn't be personal. Just try to prevent it being personal. Though moon is in Scorpio. When the moon is in Scorpio, regardless of your sign, it's difficult to keep things impersonal. So try to get a sense of perspective. And I think that for most Sagittarians, the best way to deal with today is just to keep a distance and actually not engage with heated conversations and even heated thinking. You can have an argument with yourself. It's very easy to have arguments with yourself. You have one thought, you have another thought, just goes back and forth, and the day's gone. That kind of argument, that internal argument, that also should be avoided. So perhaps you need to do things which are maybe distracting, which don't get too focused, because once you've got a focus, once you've got intensity, then you've got perhaps the beginnings of obsession, and I don't think that is something that you want. Capricorn, Moon is trine Saturn. Arguably, that's the main aspect of the day, and with the Moon trine Saturn, I think that you're going to feel comfortable. And the world out there is pretty crazy, but you don't have to be part of it. You can maybe watch from a distance, and with that Moon trine Saturn, you can give yourself a certain amount of stability and grounding, and I think you can also get that grounding from other people, maybe your family or other people you meet today. The people you meet today, if you are meeting people today, they should be reinforcing. They should be reinforcing what you believe in and what you want. It's not a time to be challenged. You want everything to be comfortable, and I think it really can be comfortable with that Moon trine Saturn. And this Moon trine Saturn may have some implications for relationships, because Saturn kind of represents you, Moon represents the other person. Moon is making a trine to Saturn. Moon is in Scorpio. Okay, Moon in Scorpio doesn't sound great, but Scorpio, from a Capricorn perspective, is actually quite a sociable sign. So with Moon trine Saturn, there seems to be a good chance that you are able to get on with people and to be able to understand their perspective, and at the same time they can understand your perspective, and you shouldn't be afraid of gently presenting your particular view of the world, and don't hide who you are. You don't have to hide who you are. I mean, I think it should be very, very obvious who you are. Now, in terms of how you deal with, ideas, Mercury is opposition Jupiter, and Mercury is also moving towards a square to Saturn. So tomorrow, Mercury is square Saturn. And so Saturn is you. And the question is, what does Mercury represent? Mercury could represent something coming in from the outside. That is possible. And it may represent an idea. And Jupiter and Saturn perhaps are about your response to something. And it may be that something is coming your way, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, that you have to respond to, and you have to get the response right. And part of you wants to be optimistic, wants to see things in a positive light, and perhaps give encouragement. But another part of you is able to see the problem. And you don't want to exaggerate either way. You could find yourself just focusing entirely on the negative or entirely on the positive. And you might cycle between the two, seeing something that you're trying to think about. Is this a good idea? One moment you're thinking, this is a terrible idea. The next moment you're thinking, this is a great idea, and you're a little bit uncertain about it. And I think that this process of challenge may continue through into tomorrow. I think maybe today you're more focusing on the positive. Tomorrow you can start to see perhaps the disadvantages of things, and as you'll see tomorrow, I think there is a temptation perhaps for you to be a little bit negative. Maybe it's the right thing to do to be negative. So while it's a good idea to interact with other people, to see yourself as a social animal, in a general sense, how you respond to other people's ideas could actually be very important. Aquarius, there is something about you today which is actually quite serious. You realize that there are important things to be done, important things to think about, and you want everything to be straightforward. And the reason for this is that the moon is moving through Scorpio, and the moon in Scorpio is making a trine to Saturn. And with this moon trine Saturn, I think you're very aware of what you want to do. You're aware of your responsibilities, and in your own way, you're quite ambitious. You feel that there's really something you want to progress on, you want to move forward with. And that trine Saturn, I think, actually does give you the discipline to see it through. And perhaps it gives you also the discipline to present things in a way that other people appreciate. You know how to present things in a way that is effective, that gets a response. So it's a day when you don't want to waste the opportunity. I mean, I don't know what your plans are for today, but if you do have ambitions, then I would suggest that you really just plough forward with them. I think that's something you can do, and I think you can actually be very effective about it. Now, the main aspect today is an opposition between Mercury and Jupiter. Now, this Mercury-Jupiter opposition, it doesn't affect you directly, but you are very much aware of it. And I think Mercury-Jupiter opposition can be about too much talking, too much theorizing. And I know Aquarius is an air sign, and air can be about theorizing, but there can be too much theorizing, and I think you might be irritated by too much theorizing. If there's too much planning, too many ideas, we could do this, we could do that, that could drive you crazy. At some stage, Aquarius, you want a plan. That is important to you. And Mercury opposition Jupiter could represent a situation where different plans are being discussed. Well, we could do this, we could do that, and in the end, absolutely nothing happens. And what matters is doing something of lasting value. And you can't do anything of lasting value if you're spending ages talking about it, thinking about it. So this Mercury-Jupiter opposition just might represent a situation that is annoying, that gets out of control, and really isn't really to your liking. Now, one lunar aspect that I haven't mentioned so far, but perhaps more about tomorrow in terms of that direct aspect, but I think you're still feeling it, is the moon is making a square to Venus. And Venus is in Aquarius, moon is in Scorpio. This moon square Venus, perhaps it's more of a case if you're in the Americas, but I think everyone can feel it to an extent, simply because the moon and Venus are in signs which are in natural square to each other. But I think that moon square Venus does give you a certain amount of charisma. It gives you the ability to present things in a way that people appreciate. And so if you've got something you want to you want to discuss, and you want support from someone, or perhaps you want support from a group of people with this moon square Venus. I mean, it is a square, so it's not necessarily going to be completely easy, but if you make an effort to get support, not necessarily just from people, maybe from an organization, if someone's open on today, I don't know, December the 26th, but if you want support for something, Aquarius, then I think with this moon square Venus, I think you can get it. And this moon square Venus, okay, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, you might not feel this moon square Venus, but you'll get it tomorrow. I mean, don't worry, it's going to just be a bit delayed. So I think for Aquarians, that moon square Venus may actually be an aspect that you can actually use. Pisces, you are, I think, quite open-minded. You understand that there are many different possibilities, and maybe you are quite excited about these possibilities. But of course, possibilities on their own don't mean much. Those possibilities have to be made real, and that does require a little bit of work, but I think you're quite able to put in that work because you've got Moon trine Saturn, and Saturn, of course, is in Pisces. Saturn is in your sign. So Moon trine Saturn, it's about possibilities being realized, through your own application and perhaps hard work. So if you're thinking about different things, different possibilities, they may be quite inspirational. They may be sort of just ideas that maybe seem a little bit far-fetched, but with Moon trine Saturn, you can take something which seems a little bit crazy and you can make it real. And I think that really is possible. So don't dismiss something just because it seems crazy. Give it some thought and give it some structure. I really do think that is something you can do. Now, we do have today an opposition between Mercury and Jupiter. Now, this aspect between Mercury and Jupiter is important for a number of reasons. Firstly, the opposition takes place across an important axis of your chart. It's Sagittarius, Gemini, Mercury in Sagittarius, Jupiter in Gemini. It's the career home axis of your chart. In the jargon, that's the 4th, 10th house. So it's an important part of your chart. And then, of course, Jupiter is your ruler. So we got Mercury opposition Jupiter, your ruler. And this Mercury-Jupiter opposition could actually be quite challenging. It may be that the challenge comes from another person in the form of Mercury. Mercury in Sagittarius might be someone who talks a lot, who wants to be heard, and they're challenging you. You don't like what they're saying, or they're pressurizing you to do something. Again, you resist. It's annoying. But I don't think that you can ignore what the other world is. I don't think you can ignore what the world is throwing at you, what the world is suggesting. Doesn't mean you have to do what you're told, but you at least have to listen. And I think you are being challenged. You may be in a situation where you're being told something that you know is true, or someone's making a suggestion, but you know it's a good suggestion, but you're resisting it for some reason. And it is an opposition. You don't find it easy. And this Mercury opposition Jupiter can also be about relationships, because Mercury rules Virgo. Virgo's your opposite sign. So when you got Mercury opposition Jupiter, that might indicate that certain relationships are a little bit tense. And these relationships could take many forms. They could be professional relationships, or relationships that you have with someone that only exist in a certain place. Maybe if you're working, for example, it could be a working relationship, but there is a challenge there, and it seems largely to be about you wanting to hold your ground and someone else having different ideas, and there being a lot of tension there. But I don't think it's a situation where you should just where you should just be stubborn regardless. I think there's a temptation to be stubborn, but I don't think that's the right approach. I think you've got to, if you possibly can, be ready to meet people halfway, at the very least, because I don't think you're in a situation where your own interests are fundamentally being threatened. Remembering that Mercury and Jupiter are in mutual reception, they're in each other's signs. So that indicates perhaps two people who disagree, who have different priorities, but at the same time just have a natural sympathy with each other. And so you don't want to overreact, and you perhaps have to be sympathetic to other people, understand their motives, perhaps also understand that maybe they want the best for you, even if it doesn't seem like it. And those are my forecasts of the 12 signs. Like yesterday, I think I was briefer than usual, so if you're expecting something longer, my apologies. But astrologically, the day was really dominated by that Mercury opposition Jupiter, and I will be talking more about that Mercury opposition Jupiter tomorrow, because Mercury is, it's making a square to Saturn, and so we really do have a T-square to talk about tomorrow, and that's something that I'm really going to be emphasizing. Anyway, what I want to do now is look at the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like? Remember, it's Thursday, December 26th, Boxing Day. What is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got, now don't panic, it's not as bad as it looks. The first hexagram I got was hexagram 12, standstill. So to begin with, it may seem like absolutely nothing is happening. Standstill. I think that when I did the I Ching for the week as a whole, I got standstill. So it may be that today is a day of maybe maximum standstill. It just feels that things aren't really moving. And if you look at the hexagram, you can just see the problem. It's got three broken lines at the bottom, three unbroken lines at the top. There's a sort of lack of balance. The hexagram, to me at least, seems a little bit top heavy, and I do see this hexagram as perhaps being the slamming of the loft door. I mean, that's my idea about this, the slamming of the loft door. Now let me explain what I mean. The slamming of the loft door, it perhaps represents heaven and earth. If you see heaven as being the loft and earth as being down here, and there's a loft door, and that loft door is closed. So heaven is not coming down to earth. Earth is not going up to heaven. Heaven has had enough of earth. It has slammed the door. And I suppose if you're into the Kabbalah, and I suppose the divine had to shut out the earth, because in case it were to be too overwhelming, isn't that right? We can't get past a certain point, because we're humans and we're imperfect humans. I mean, I don't want to get too spiritual about it, really. Not what I really know what I'm talking about. Remember, Mercury is opposition Jupiter, and I'm a Gemini, so there is a real temptation for Geminis to talk nonsense today, as I've already suggested when looking at Geminis. But anyway, caveat emptor kind of thing, isn't it? So be wary there, but just be aware that things aren't going to move to begin with. Things are going to be slow. It just might feel that perhaps the forces of evil are in the ascendancy. I mean, I say evil because I Ching likes to use these kind of terms, but it's just slow. But there is a moving line, and the fifth line moves. And in the I Ching, the fifth line is very often the most fortunate line, and it does represent a kind of a breakthrough. Things finally start to move, and the standstill is starting to be over. And there is also a different view, and it's saying, yes, there is a standstill, but it may be a standstill that is fortunate. And maybe if we look at the astrology, we've got Moon in Scorpio, trine Saturn in Pisces. It's a nice aspect. Moon in Scorpio is a fixed sign, doesn't really want to move. Trine Saturn is holding the moon back, and that might be a kind of a fortunate halt. We really couldn't go any further, and we stopped in the right place. There are many places we can stop. If we stop somewhere where we are nurtured and we can understand what's going on, then that is for the good. And the I Ching talks about mulberry bushes, and in terms of this moving line, and the I Ching is suggesting, well, the mulberry bush is apparently very strong and it has good growth. At least the mulberry bush in the I Ching does have good growth, and it's saying that when the mulberry bush is cut, it grows even stronger. And it's kind of suggesting that we need to perhaps align ourselves to the mulberry bush. And so the mulberry bush might be about, or the mulberry tree, it's a plant that has been perhaps restricted because it's been cut, but it doesn't matter. The mulberry bush is growing strongly, and we perhaps need to align ourselves to the mulberry bush. Just because we're in a standstill situation doesn't mean it's a problem, because it may be that the longer we stay in one place, the stronger we grow, the stronger we get. And those shoots of the mulberry bush, they might be cut, but they're growing even stronger. So in a way, the restriction that we've had today is actually making us stronger. So a standstill is not a problem. A standstill is an advantage. It allows us to put down roots and to tune into our strength. And this hexagram standstill, it does move because the fifth line is moving, and it transitions to the hexagram 35, which is progress. So progress is as it sounds. Having had a halt, a forced halt, but perhaps a fortuitous halt, we can start to make progress again. I mean, it's not that we're going to do anything dramatic, but we are going to be able to move forward. And I think, by the end of the day, we're going to be actually quite comfortable with the way things are going. Okay, we won't have achieved all our targets, but perhaps we'll be confident that in the near future we can achieve some of these targets, and perhaps all of them. And that's it with the I Ching. And I now want to look at the opposition between Mercury and Jupiter. So let's have a look at this opposition, which does take place today. So you can see in the chart that Mercury's in Sagittarius, Jupiter is in Gemini. The two planets are opposition. Here is the precise time of the opposition. It actually takes place quite late in the day, London time, 10:48 p.m. So that means if you're in Australia or New Zealand, or in fact all of Asia, and far east of Europe. I suppose if you're in Russia, it will happen tomorrow. If you're in the Americas, then the opposition will take place this afternoon. I suppose, yeah, that's right. And so it is exact, and it's exact at 13 degrees 47 of the sign. So, in a general sense, what does it mean, this Mercury opposition Jupiter? Well, Mercury opposition Jupiter does seem to suggest a person who maybe is quite into talking. There is a lot to say, and there's a lot to communicate. And it is an opposition, though. It doesn't seem to be an easy way of communicating. It seems to be somewhat forced, perhaps somewhat angry. And maybe angry. It doesn't have to always be angry, but sometimes maybe those words don't always hit home as powerfully as they should, or the words might be powerful, but they might be too powerful, and so we might go over the top with Mercury opposition Jupiter. So over talking might be one way in which Mercury Jupiter manifests. It could be overthinking. Mercury is about the thinking process, and so with Mercury opposition Jupiter, we might have lots we want to think about, and we just keep thinking, and we can't stop thinking. It could be about writing, I suppose. Once the mind and the paper get going, I suppose one could imagine someone just churning stuff out. But you can see how it might become too much of a good thing. Does it make for a good writer, Mercury opposition Jupiter? I'm not convinced. Not convinced at all. It might be someone who writes a lot, but the quality of that writing might not always be very good. So it is a powerful aspect. I think it's an aspect that could have its disadvantages. And what I want to do is I want to start by looking at some examples of people who have Mercury opposition Jupiter. I'm not going to use many examples. I'm going to also look at some events where Mercury is opposition Jupiter, and then I want to consider a few places and people who might be influenced by it. And then I want to finish by looking at Emmanuel Macron, because I think I haven't looked at Emmanuel Macron for some time, and I also want to consider Mercury-Jupiter in terms of Macron's horoscope. So as far as people who have Mercury opposition Jupiter in their horoscopes, Barack Obama has Mercury opposition Jupiter. And I would have said that Barack Obama is an example of someone who utilizes his Mercury-Jupiter opposition very well. I think I looked at his chart quite recently in terms of his Mercury-Jupiter opposition, so I don't really want to say too much about it. But in his day, he was a very good communicator with Mercury opposition Jupiter. In his 2008 election campaign, he was very effective. I'm not saying that he was the best orator in the world, but he was an okay orator. And of course, he wrote that book, which helped launch his political career. And I think his book was his memoir and talking about his family, and that was very successful. So again, Mercury opposition Jupiter, and he certainly has a lot to say for himself. But if you look at the campaign, the latest campaign, Mercury opposition Jupiter, with his Mercury opposition Jupiter, when he was advocating for Kamala Harris, that Mercury-Jupiter opposition didn't work. Perhaps Mercury-Jupiter only works if the time is right. When he was haranguing black men for not voting for Kamala, but somehow they should be voting for Kamala, that they had some kind of obligation to do it, and he said too much. I've said that would be an example of his Mercury-Jupiter opposition going too far. But overall, I I don't think it's it's a bad aspect for him, and I think it worked quite well. So Macron has Mercury-Jupiter opposition, but I will be talking about that later. Now, if you want to look at Mercury-Jupiter in its absolute worst possible light, Mercury-Jupiter opposition at its worst would be Roland Freisler, who was a Nazi who was responsible for the People's Court. So he was the one that sentenced the plotters of the bomb plot in 1944 to death, and he sentenced the Scholls to death, and he was really unpleasant, and I think he was quite influenced by the show trials in Moscow. So Freisler actually, although he was a Nazi, had been a communist when he was younger. I think he'd been a German prisoner of war in Russia, and so he was in Russia at the time of a revolution, and he had started off being sympathetic to communism, and he kind of realized where his interests lay, and so there's his Mercury-Jupiter opposition, and so he got involved in the law. I mean, the law, I suppose that's a good profession for Mercury opposition Jupiter. And so he kind of switched his views. He was influenced by the show trials in Russia in the 1930s, and he saw how the show trials had happened, when people were, unjustly accused of plotting against Stalin and the Soviet Union. And I think he was influenced in terms of his own behavior. And so he became a judge in the People's Court, and he would harangue and insult and humiliate the people in front of him. And that's Mercury opposition Jupiter at work, perhaps Mercury in Scorpio, just at its worst. Mercury, it is Mercury opposition Jupiter, but it doesn't have the nice free-flowing flexibility of, say, Mercury in Sagittarius, Jupiter in Gemini. No, this is Mercury in Scorpio opposition Jupiter in Taurus. But I do think he is a good example of Mercury opposition Jupiter. Taylor Swift has Mercury opposition Jupiter. Again, don't want to say too much about her. I mean, you'd think it works quite well for her. Her Mercury in Capricorn, opposition Jupiter in Cancer. I suppose she produces a lot of songs. She sings a lot. I don't know whether she talks a lot, but she communicates a lot, that's for sure. I mean, her communication doesn't always work. She endorsed Kamala Harris, and that didn't really work. I think there's a theory that her endorsement actually lost Kamala votes, but maybe she said one thing too much, an endorsement too far. And Tulsi Gabbard, who again, I suppose she's someone who's switched. Mercury opposition Jupiter. I mean, I don't want to compare Roland Freisler and Tulsi Gabbard, but Roland Freisler is someone who started off as a communist and became a Nazi. So there was a switch in terms of an ideological switch. And you could say with Tulsi Gabbard that there was likewise some kind of switch. She started as being a candidate for the Democrat nomination in 2020, and she ended up being on Trump's team, being a vocal advocate for Trump. And so Mercury opposition Jupiter can be about switching. I must emphasize, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with switching. Sometimes you have to do it. I'm not using that to be negative about Tulsi Gabbard, but it may be one way in which Mercury-Jupiter works, and she has Mercury in Aries opposition Jupiter in Libra. It's not an exact Mercury It's not an exact Mercury-Jupiter opposition. She actually has Mercury opposition Saturn as well, but that Mercury in Aries has certainly got a lot to say for itself. That is certainly the case, and it was what she had to say for it herself. You know, when she was debating Kamala Harris in 2020, I think she destroyed Kamala Harris in 1 minute. So that's Mercury in Aries opposition Jupiter. So that's a way in which Mercury-Jupiter oppositions can work. And a few events. two massacres which took place very close to one another, massacres which I've looked at recently. One was the My Lai massacre on March the 16th, 1968, when American soldiers entered the village of the South Vietnamese village of My Lai, and I've said Saigon, but I don't worry, I have changed the coordinates to My Lai, and so that's Mercury opposition Jupiter, and earlier there was the Phong Nai massacre. So this was the month before. There'd been another massacre. This time it was conducted by South Koreans in South Vietnam. So it was all part of the same Mercury-Jupiter cycle. So here we had Mercury. Mercury was going retrograde. It had just made the opposition to Jupiter. Then Mercury went direct and moved. And there you can see Mercury. Where's Mercury gone? I've lost Mercury. Again, Mercury's at 2808 Aquarius at the time of a My Lai massacre, and Mercury was at 2938 Aquarius at the time of the Phong Nai massacre. So with Mercury opposition Jupiter, Mercury opposition Jupiter could be about jumping to conclusions, people overreacting, and you think that that's just a mental overreaction, but I suppose if you got people with guns, nervous American or South Korean soldiers overreacting and just killing, and I don't know, but with the Phong Nai massacre, I think the South Koreans had been upset that they had been fired at by the Viet Cong, and they then took it out on this village. But they did compensate the villagers of Phong Nai. They gave them, after the massacre, they did apologise. Apparently they gave them 30 bags of rice as compensation. And a big explosion, Mercury opposition Saturn, something taking place in New Zealand. The Rainbow Warrior. So the Rainbow Warrior was a ship operated by Greenpeace that was monitoring French nuclear tests, and the French sent some agents to blow the thing up. So it was blown up, and there was a photographer on board who was killed. This took place in Auckland Harbour, and there you can see Mercury-Jupiter opposition. How does that fit? Well, I suppose in this case, you have to consider the nodes. So you've got the north nodes, Mercury opposition Jupiter. It could be an exaggerated reaction. Mercury-Jupiter, the French authorities getting upset and agitated about the fact that that Greenpeace were messing with their tests, and so Mercury-Jupiter opposition, they decided that the best thing to do was to blow up the Rainbow Warrior, and I think straight away they were found out. The people who blew it up were arrested. So I think it was a bit of an embarrassment for France. And so the moon is in Aries. I suppose that's kind of moon in Aries thing to do, square Mars. So that is a manifestation, and a recent manifestation of Mercury-Jupiter opposition. The Mercury-Jupiter opposition was the killing of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare. So he was killed December the 4th, 2024. Mercury was at 1639 Sagittarius. Gemini at 1643 Gemini. I mean, I suppose in terms of the events, what I just looked at, maybe one kind of thinks of the Rainbow Warrior. It's something that just someone had to do. Mercury opposition Jupiter, perhaps an exaggerated response to something. Here's this CEO. representative of the inequities of the American healthcare system. And the Mercury-Jupiter opposition is a feeling that enough is enough, and that someone wants to just take the action and do it. And I suppose you could say that the blowing up of a rainbow warrior was successful in the sense that the rainbow warrior was destroyed, but in the French case, it wasn't successful in the sense that it was a huge embarrassment, and those who did blow up the Rainbow Warrior were caught. So likewise with the Brian Thompson killing, the person whoever it was, I know someone's been arrested for it, but innocent till proven guilty, and I think he has already. Luigi Mangione has pleaded not guilty, so we don't know who did it. But Mercury opposition Jupiter is someone's been caught. We don't know whether the right person has been caught, but that's Mercury opposition Jupiter. But that might just give us an idea about how Mercury opposition Jupiter is working. And then I want to consider two countries that might be impacted by this Mercury opposition Jupiter. I shouldn't think anything will happen, but I just what I noticed. Malawi, I don't know anything about Malawi. Obviously, it's in sort of East Africa, and Malawi has this is a date of Malawi's independence. I don't think we really know the time of Malawi's independence. Maybe that is the right time, I don't know. But this is a chart of Malawi's independence. And so at the time of Malawi's independence, you can see that Malawi had a square between Mars and Pluto. So Mars in Gemini, square Pluto in Virgo. And this Mars, if we just compare the Malawi with this Jupiter, with this Mercury-Jupiter opposition. So we have got the chart of Malawi in the middle, and the Mercury-Jupiter opposition on the outer wheel. So you can see that at the moment, Malawi has Jupiter conjunct its Mars, Jupiter square its Pluto, Mercury is opposition its Mars. So I don't know what's happening in Malawi, but maybe over the next few days we'll get news from Malawi. So that's we don't often get news from Malawi, do we? I think there was the reason I have this chart is I think there was a plane crash fairly recently in which some Malawi politician was killed, and there was a big trauma for Malawi. We should be checking on Malawi. And another country is Denmark. I have a chart of 12:12 p.m. for Denmark becoming a country. I don't know if that's right. So Denmark has its sun at 1437 Gemini, and it's got a sun opposition true black moon Lilith. And so this Mercury-Jupiter opposition is on Denmark's sun. So it's got Jupiter conjunct its sun. In fact, Jupiter has just been over Denmark's sun. Now Mercury is about to go opposition Denmark's sun. So it's possible that this Mercury, that this aspect has an impact on the Danish body politic, maybe on the prime minister. Is she still prime minister? Here's a Danish prime minister, by the way. Here's a chart of the Danish prime minister, and Danish prime minister actually has her Uranus at 13. No, not her. It's not her Uranus I'm worried about. Her Uranus is at 13 Scorpio, and I can't see anything directly hitting her chart. Oh, yes, I can actually. I knew there was something. She's got Mercury. The Danish prime minister Mette Frederiksen I assume she's still Prime Minister. I have not been following Danish politics, so if she's resigned, my apologies. But anyway, Mette Frederiksen has got Mercury-Neptune conjunction in her chart. So that means that if you look at what's happening to Mette Frederiksen and this Mercury opposition Jupiter, she's got a Mercury return, and Jupiter is opposition her Mercury. So that might be something disturbing her, something upsetting her. I mean, I think she was recently attacked in the street. I think over the summer she was attacked in the street, and I think she found that very traumatic. I don't think she was injured at all, but I think it was very, very traumatic for her. And so, I don't know, perhaps we should be looking at Denmark and its Prime Minister, assuming it is still Mette Frederiksen, with this Mercury-Jupiter opposition hitting her Mercury. And I think her Mercury-Neptune, just because something upsetting her, something not really working right for her, and perhaps not working right for her country as well. So so Denmark is certainly something to consider, as is a country to consider. And finally, I want to look at Emmanuel Macron. And I should have looked at Emmanuel Macron at the time of his birthday, because he had his 47th birthday just a few days ago on December the 21st. And Emmanuel Macron has a opposition between Mercury and Jupiter. It's a dissociate opposition. So there is Emmanuel Macron's Mercury at 2952 Sagittarius retrograde, and its opposition Jupiter. So it doesn't seem to be, because you've got Sagittarius opposition, a Sagittarius planet opposition a Jupiter, opposition a Cancer planet, but they are actually quite closely in opposition, just a couple of degrees. So how would Emmanuel Macron manifest this Mercury-Jupiter opposition? Clearly, Emmanuel Macron is a man who has got a lot to say, and he believes he's right. I mean, he is Jupiter. I mean, he is described as Jupiter, and he's got a strong Jupiter. He's got Jupiter in, okay, it might be retrograde, but it's an exalted Jupiter in Cancer, and it is opposition Jupiter. So there's his Mercury opposition. There's his Mercury opposition Jupiter. So he is someone who is perhaps an embodiment of Mercury opposition Jupiter, and worked well for him up to a point. I mean, he became president of France. I mean, I think he's an effective communicator, but now it's gone wrong. Now, Mercury opposition Jupiter might be tempted to overthink things, to meddle. Mercury can't just relax. Jupiter is always challenging Mercury. And so Mercury might kind of meddle and keep changing things. It's like what's going on with its elections. I mean, he's just being incredibly manipulative. He didn't get what he after, I think, the European elections, he had new legislative elections, and he was trying to engineer the right prime minister for himself and playing all sorts of political games. And that's him just making things overcomplicated. And yeah, Emmanuel Macron is a clever man, but in this case, he might be too clever by half. And so, as far as his year is concerned, before I go back to that Mercury-Jupiter opposition, I suppose we should look at his solar return for 2024. So this should describe his year ahead. I suppose the thing that stands out might be the fact that the moon is making an opposition to Saturn. And so Moon at 6 Virgo, opposition Sagittarius, Saturn at 13 Virgo, 13-14 Pisces. It's not an exact opposition, but in 6 or 7 degrees it becomes exact. So maybe in about 7 degrees time, or if we turn one unit into another unit, degrees can be turned into months. So maybe 6 in terms of a solar return, so 6 or 7 months. So that might be, I suppose that would be maybe May or June of next year. That might be some big event impacting him. Venus is on the descendant. That's something that we should certainly be taking note of. I don't know. That might say something about his relationships, the people he has to deal with, the women in his life, the women in his political life. I don't know. There's some possibility there. And of course, you've got Mars in the 12th house. I suppose from a whole sign perspective, Mars is rising. So that's his solar return. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a particularly dramatic solar return. And then there is the question of his Mercury-Jupiter, opposition. So we have to see this not in isolation, but the fact that it's wound up with the Sun. So Macron has a Sun-Mercury conjunction, and it's opposition Jupiter. So Sun-Mercury conjunction in Sagittarius. His Mercury is not really in a very good position because his Mercury is in Sagittarius. It's in its detriment. It's retrograde, and it's conjunct the Sun. It's combust. It's not Cazimi. It's 27 minutes off the conjunction of the Sun. So it's not quite close enough to be Cazimi. So the Sun represents his ego, and as we know, Emmanuel Macron has a huge ego, and so Mercury close to the Sun, he kind of gets a bit burnt out, doesn't it? Can Mercury think straight? Yeah, clever man, very clever man, but again, perhaps too clever. And yeah, that Jupiter is opposition Mercury. So that Mercury is under a lot of pressure always. But so far he's got away with it. And it just comes over as, I suppose, this precocious intelligence. I suppose when he was younger it would have been a precocious intelligence. But clearly Macron, with that Mercury combust, he thinks he knows everything. He thinks he's the cleverest person in the room. I get that impression. And this complex, Sun conjunct Mercury, opposition Jupiter, in 2025 is going to get hit by two planets, by Saturn and Neptune. So next year, Saturn goes into Aries, and Neptune goes into Aries. So that means that Saturn and Neptune are on the brink of his Sun-Mercury, of making a square to his Sun-Mercury conjunction. Now, Neptune has already made that a square to his Sun-Mercury conjunction. And that was at the time when he was messing around with legislative elections and appearing to get away with it, but I think causing quite a lot of structural damage to his presidency. But next year, we've got Saturn involved as well. So if we look at the timing of the thing, and by the way, before I look at the timing of the thing, there is another aspect to consider, and that is Uranus, the moon. He's got an exact moon-Uranus opposition, and his Uranus is 45 degrees from his Sun. So he's got a moon-Uranus opposition 45 degrees from a Sun-Mercury conjunction, and kind of hitting his Jupiter as well. So moon, by using a 45-degree dial, using a 90-degree dial, those planets are conjunct, or we can look at it from a fourth harmonic perspective. Let me just show you the fourth harmonic. Well, eighth harmonic. So if we created an eighth harmonic chart, which of course an eighth harmonic chart is the same as a 90-degree dial. So let me just create the 90-degree dial for this. So if we create the create the 90-degree dial, there is his Sun and Mercury, and it's, you see, on his 90-degree dial, there's his Moon-Uranus conjunction, and it's not a Moon-Uranus conjunction. It's a Moon-Uranus opposition, but the Moon-Uranus opposition, the Moon-Uranus opposition is shown as a conjunction on the 90-degree dial. The Sun-Mercury conjunction is already a conjunction. His Sun-Mercury conjunction is opposition Uranus, opposition Moon on the 90-degree dial. In the main chart, of course, it's a 45-degree aspect. So Saturn and Neptune are going to be hitting an incredibly sensitive point in his chart. So when does this happen? Well, Neptune has already hit it, but now Neptune went retrograde. But so Neptune starts the year at 2718 Pisces, and it's a slow mover, but by March, Neptune will square his Sun, it will square his Mercury, it will semi-square his Moon, and it will sesquiquadrate his Mercury. So he gets completely hit by Neptune in March. And all the while, Saturn is moving through late Pisces. And so Saturn, a bit later in the year, in May 2025, Saturn will be doing the same thing. So his chart gets chewed to pieces by Saturn and Neptune next year. I mean, I know that his presidency continues until 2027, but if anyone thinks that Macron is over the worst, I think they need to think again. And finally, just looking at his solar arc directions, so here is Macron's solar arc directions for January the 1st, 2025, and this means I'm moving every planet in his chart 1 degree. So sorry, every 1 degree for every year. So I'm moving every planet in his chart approximately 47 degrees, and so doing his solar arc for that Mars. So that Mars is at 28 at January the 1st is 2855 Virgo. So that means that he's got his solar arc directed Mars is now moving onto his Sun, moving to the square of his Sun and square of his Mercury, and this will happen over the course of the year. It will be exact in the last half of the year, but Saturn and Neptune are still going to be aspecting his Sun-Mercury conjunction, and of course his Jupiter and everything else. So in terms of Emmanuel Macron, in terms of that solar arc directed Mars, Saturn and Neptune, Emmanuel Macron may have had a bad 2024, but I think there's an argument to say that his 2025 is going to be even worse. But still, I do wish Emmanuel Macron a belated happy 47th birthday. Anyway, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.